Wow, this guy just ran right into the corner. Love to see it. Make it easy on me. So let's start at the very end, actually, because this is like the final position that you want. You want to get the opponent's king into the same colored corner as the kind of bishop that you have. So we have a dark square bishop, we need to get them into the dark corner because that's how we're going to give the mate. The bishop will be the mating piece. Up until then, though, the bishop helps corral the king, and the knight actually does more of the work along with the king. So this is kind of the final deal that you want. We'll go through it slowly. So right at the very end here, okay, we've given this check. Now the king, kind of similar to the way you do like a queen and king mate, the king only has these two squares to go back and forth between. That's what you want. And then your bishop's gonna check this square, your knight's gonna check this square, so you need to just get your pieces in the right place. As long as your bishop is now covering this square, you can jump your knight wherever you want, right? The king just has to go back and forth here. So how can the knight get to a place where it can check this square? Be there. So we're gonna move our knight here, they go back, but now if we go here, then it's a stalemate, because the king is stuck in the corner, it can't move. All these squares are covered, and it's a stalemate. So you have to make a waiting move with your bishop. Notice still holding on to this square somewhere. So you can pretty much move it wherever you want. I usually just kind of rock back a square. Now we're ready to give this check, and the mate in the corner. So that's how the end of it looks. But how do we get to this position? Let's take some notes. The knight is one square diagonal from the square where the king will be mated, which remember is the corner, one of the corner. It can be this corner too. Usually people teach it this way because this is, I think, the more common way that it ends up going. But you can do this along any side. It takes practice because once you learn it one way and then suddenly you're trying to do it like down this way, it gets a little weird. If the king runs to this opposite corner, then everything is easy. As long as you can keep the king along the edge of the board, then it's easy. So let's talk about how we're going to get to this position from this position, okay? The king is in the opposite corner, but it's on the edge of the board, and this bishop is now covering this square. Getting it here is kind of the hard part, but we're not going to talk about that. We want our knight here at the very end. From here, working backwards, the knight is going to be on what is called like the W track. Once the knight is on this track, it will not go to any other square. So if you're doing this and you're considering a knight move that is not on this like W situation, it's the wrong move. Like absolutely guaranteed it's the wrong move. Your knight is never going to go to a square that is not one of these squares. So for example, if you're trying to mate in this corner, okay, the knight ultimately needs to end up going here. Then we draw the W backwards, and this is where it's going to start, okay? If the king's over here. So, okay. Whoa. Why did I do that? Okay, right. So giving this check, or not check, moving the knight here. It's on this W track. Just one more time for the visuals. We want to keep the king along the edge of the board, right? We don't want the king to go backwards. So first order of business, we're going to stop the king from going backwards. Once the king moves out of opposition with our king, then we can move the knight on the W track, also preventing the king from moving forward. We follow with the king. And now this is the scary part, right? The king has escaped the edge of the board. It's actually not that scary. all you have to do is the same thing. We're moving our knight along the same track, and even though it looks like the king is able to escape, the knight is covering these 2 squares, and we're essentially forcing the king inside of this little prison, okay? If it gets over here, that's fine. We're just going to move our king, and it's going to get there anyway. So the only squares that we really have to worry about the king escaping is through the dark squares. Luckily, we have a dark squared bishop. So again, knight's covering these 2 squares. We want our bishop to cover these squares, and then you can see when I highlight the squares, there's just nowhere for the king to actually go. So we bring the bishop back to cover those dark squares, and then we have to make some waiting moves while we force the king back onto the edge of the board. So in this case, if it had gone here, we would just wait with our bishop like this. Obviously don't want to give our bishop away. Since it's not on this dark square, we can just immediately go here. And now, okay, the king is back. Like I said, it looks scary because without highlighting the squares that our pieces are covering, it just looks like it's just this wide open space for the king to go. It's not. It's fine, I promise. So now we can take this opposition again, and now, okay, the king's trying to go backwards. The knight is covering this square, so it can't actually continue to go backwards. The only square we need to worry about the king escaping is, again, through this dark square. So we just bring the bishop back to cover that dark square. And then again, same when it was over here, we want to prevent the king from going backwards. So we bring the bishop back, and now we continue with the W, because the king has moved out of opposition towards the corner where we want it. We continue with the W. Okay, if the king goes back and takes opposition again, we don't move with our king because then this king escapes down this way. Instead, we give this check. And again, this is still on the W track. We move the king to protect, and now we can move our king again because, again, if it goes back, the square is covered by the knight. This is where we can start giving checks. A lot of this is not giving checks, but in this case, we can give one. And now, okay, we're in this position that we talked about at the very beginning. The square is covered by the bishop. The king only has these 2 squares to go back and forth between. So now we can do whatever the heck we want with our knight. Move it away. King goes back and forth between these 2 squares. We don't go here because that's a stalemate. We have to wait with our bishop. Then we give the knight check and bishop mate in the corner. The important thing with this technique is that the last move you're going to make is the bishop mate. So you got to get your knight out of the way. You wouldn't be able to give the check here, for example, unless your bishop was somehow here or something like that. Sometimes they'll set that up as a drill, if your bishop's here and your knight is here. But in this case, with the technique we've used, the last piece that you're going to move is your bishop, so this line needs to be open for it. And it's that simple. I feel like I rushed through that a little bit, but I hope that was helpful. Have you ever had to find a knight and bishop mate in one of your games? I haven't. I have been in a scenario, though, where it could have happened. My opponent could have sacked their last piece for one of my pawns or something and left me with this situation. And I remember being scared because I didn't know how to do it. And I've heard some people in the area attempting it and failing in tournament games. So it's definitely possible, and I think it's just one of those things where it's probably good to know at a certain point. But like I said earlier, it's also just a matter of a good drill to just learn how these pieces work together and cut down on the squares where the king can go. Because even if there was a bunch more pieces on the board, this sort of technique of corralling the king is still just a good one to know.